Welcome to the Mentoring Matters podcast, where we talk about leadership, life, and the transformative power of mentoring. I'm Solveig Brown, and today I am so excited to have bestselling author Alison Fragale as my guest. Alison wrote Likeable Badass: How Women Get the Success They Deserve. In this episode, Alison is going to walk us through things that we can do to show up as a likable badass. We'll talk about status, power, letting go of limiting mindsets, authentic self-promotion, learning skills to tell your story more effectively, and the importance of mentoring. It's going to be a great conversation. Before we dig in, let me tell you more about Alison. In addition to writing the best-selling book, Likeable Badass: How Women Get the Success They Deserve, Alison Fragale is a research psychologist who has her PhD in organizational psychology from Stanford University. She is an award-winning professor at the Keenan-Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina and is an international keynote speaker. Alison's research commentary has appeared in news outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, Fast Company, Inc. magazine, and the Financial Times. Alison excels at translating her deep academic expertise in status, power, negotiation, and influence into actionable advice. Alison lives in Chicago with her family. Welcome, Alison. I am so happy to have you as a guest today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Alison, in Likeable Badass, you discuss power and status. Can you talk about these concepts, especially in terms of how they relate to women?
Absolutely. So, power is controlling resources that people value. So, as we were in our pre show, I mentioned that my son is hopefully getting his driver's license later today. So, as the mom, if I'm holding the car keys, and the car keys essentially are a resource, the car is a resource that he values. And so, when you control a resource that other people value, that's power. And it can be a great source of influence. My son might be more inclined to do what I want him to do if he wants the keys. At work, we have all kinds of resources we control. We can control the budget. We can hire and fire. We can give people good performance reviews or bad ones. We can make decisions without having to get approval. All of these resources that we control give us autonomy, they give us leverage, they give us influence. And that feeling of control is really important for both our success, but also our ability to just live a satisfying life. So power matters. Status also matters. Status is how much we're respected and regarded by other people. So it's other people's judgments of us, judgments of our value. But like power, that's also a source of influence. Because if you're trying to influence someone, and in that person's head, even their non-conscious brain, they're thinking, I don't really respect this person who's talking to me. They're very unlikely to be influenced by you. So our respect that comes from our audience is also a source of our life satisfaction, a source of our influence, a source of our advancement and success. So they're related in that way. And women, in comparison to men, often struggle for both. So when it comes to power, we've talked about it for a long time, particularly in the forms of pay and advancement, where women are not paid for their work at the same rates as men and don't get promoted at the same rates as men relative to their qualifications. So those are power problems. And women relative to men also encounter more status problems where for a given level of capability and caring, a given level of performance, they don't get as much respect from their audience. And so, although those are universal needs, power and status, it's one of the reasons that I wrote the book for women is that we don't all start at the same starting line. We can all finish at the same finishing line. That's the very positive part, but we don't start at the same starting line. And so it might require more intentionality from some people than for others to get the power and the status that you deserve.
I love that differentiation between power and status, and I like your examples. So in Likeable Badass, you note that the key to changing your status is really important. And you said that being a likable badass is about that. So can you define what a likable badass is?
So our status is determined by some things we don't control, like gender, and also lots of things we do control, like how we show up. So that's where likable badass comes in. So it's a catchy title, but it's not just catchy. It's a specific reference to the science of how status judgments get made. And it's like this. Every day you encounter other people, people in person, people online, people on social media, and your brain is always drawing conclusions, updating conclusions about these people. You can't help it. And what your brain pays attention to for other people is two things. First thing is you're trying to figure out is does this person care? Are they other oriented as opposed to being self-oriented or selfish? Are they going to be things like warm and likable and sincere and honest? These are all qualities that make other people's lives better. And we value that. The second thing we try to figure out is the person good at what they do? Can I rely on them? Can they deliver results? Are they capable? And we value that as well. We want people that are not only have good intentions toward us, but can actually execute on those intentions to produce good results. And so on the cover of the book, I call it likable and badass to denote those two things that we pay attention to. Psychologists will often talk about them as warmth and assertiveness or other orientation, results orientation. But the idea is that these are the things our audience pays attention to when they look at us. These are the things we pay attention to when we look at other people. So the most controllable thing that each of us as human beings can do to get other people to respect us for our great talents is to show up to as many people as you can, as often as you can, as a likable badass, as someone who communicates to their audience, I'm really caring and I'm really capable.
I love that. I think that's just such a fantastic way to differentiate those two. And also that you talk about that it is in your own power to choose how you show up. So, one of the most common development categories that mentee and mentees want to work on is authentic self promotion. Can you talk about the mindsets that limit people's perspective about authentic self promotion?
I'm a huge proponent of authentic self-promotion. So I was really happy when I saw in the survey to see that need because there's ways to that we can meet that need. Yeah, what are some of the mindsets that stand in our way? One, for example, is often referred to as imposter syndrome. I think about that as if you don't respect your own contributions, then it can be very hard to promote yourself or to act intentionally to get other people to respect your contribution. So that is a barrier. I think another barrier that I see a lot is this idea that I don't want to be a status seeker. Status is so important to our lives, but I don't want to be somebody who is acting intentionally to try to get my audience to see me in a particular way. Isn't that inauthentic? So there's a tension that I think is a false tension, and we can talk about that between being authentic and being strategic. And people think as soon as I'm being strategic, am I no longer being authentic? And I really want to be my authentic self. Oftentimes we think like gender doesn't matter because it may not be that important or salient to all of us. I was definitely raised at a time when I think opportunities were opening up wildly to women relative to what my mother felt like she had available to her when she was my age. I really felt like I could do anything. But we weren't really talking about gender, at least in conversations that were getting back to me at that age. It was just like the guys can do it, you can do it too. So just that's how you're going to think about it. And I very much was raised with this, just like put me in, I'm one of the guys, I'll just do it. And not really having a good sense of what are the differences and how does that, mean I navigate them. And also things like time. This idea that everybody I know, especially all the women I know, are beyond busy. So the idea that I would have to do anything more than I'm already doing, which feels like way too much, to get people to respect me or to promote myself, just it doesn't feel fun anyway. So it's the first thing I'm going to cut off of my to-do list. And one of my big beliefs that I want to help people understand is that getting respect for the greatness you're already doing does not have to be and shouldn't be a time consuming endeavor. It just has to be a bit of a thoughtful endeavor to make sure you're getting maximum credit for the time you're already putting in.
Right. So if someone has some of these mindsets, could you have suggestions for how to flip them so you can approach it from a more empowered way of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, in my book, I talk about them. I'll give you one specific here, and then I'll give you a general piece of advice. So, imposter syndrome, for example, a lot of people, when they have that feeling, which I've had, and it doesn't feel good, then the next thing is a judgment about the feeling. Oh, I must be doing something wrong because I feel like an imposter. I must be an imposter. I liken imposter syndrome to sore muscles after a workout. Okay. When you work out and you're sore the next day, it doesn't feel particularly fun to be sore, but you've been educated by this point that the soreness is actually a marker that you've worked out hard enough because you've torn those muscles and in the rebuilding, they will get stronger. So you are, that soreness is inevitable. There's nobody who's serious about muscle strength that says, I never want to get sore because, that will hurt too much. Yes, it doesn't feel good, but there's also the recognition of that is part of the process. So with imposter syndrome, what we see from the science is when you set high goals for yourself, if goals are sufficiently high, they will motivate you to actually perform better. More ambitious goals, better performance. That's pretty straightforward. But ambitious goals often leave us feeling worse. So whatever your goal is, you say, I want to be, in the C-suite by the time I'm 35. I want to run a marathon in under 4 hours, whatever it is. You set a goal for yourself. The fact that you have that goal will stretch you, but you may not actually hit it. You run your marathon in 4:02, you become a CEO at 38, whatever it is. And you're then thinking, oh, I didn't hit the goal. But what happens is every time we hit the goal, we just then keep resetting the bar, resetting the bar. And so there's never a moment where we feel like we are everything we want to be because we're constantly setting goals that are still beyond our reach. And so that in that sense, imposter syndrome sits in that gap. It sits between where you are, which is great, and where you're aspiring to be, which is a constantly moving target. And so the gap never goes to zero because we're always learning, we're always growing. In that sense, I say it's like sore muscles. It's not something you actually want to get rid of. It's just the byproduct of what? It's the byproduct of high goal setting. And high goal setting, we know helps us. And so I say keep setting the goals. And when you have that icky feeling, you have to coach yourself just like an athlete, which is doesn't feel great, but this is how it goes. Like this is the process. Now, the more general comment I was going to make relative to why we're here is these mindsets, you can have mantras, you can have self talk, you can have narratives, but I find they're often a lot easier to get out of when you have an external partner, like a mentor, like a coach. Somebody, when you say, I am stuck in this way of seeing things, this way of thinking about things, who can reflect to you, I don't agree with that. I think that's wrong. Let's think about how we can move you past that. It is a lot easier with external support.
I love that. And I love that analogy that normalizes that you will likely experience imposter syndrome and that it is a positive thing. It means that you are setting high goals, that you're going for it. And I like that picture of the gap and that there's always going to be a gap. There's never not going to be a gap if you keep pushing yourself and be like, oh, I can do this. So thank you. That is really, really helpful. Allison, one of the things that you talk about in your book is being able to effectively tell your story because you say that this is crucial for building status. And one of the many things I love about Likeable Badass is that you offer a playbook for telling your story. So can you walk us through, first of all, like why it's important to learn to tell your story, and then secondly, common habits that might weaken your story?
Absolutely. So this is this idea of telling your story is the authentic self-promotion, right? That you see showing up in your surveys, which is how do you talk about yourself in a way that conveys that you are very likable and very badass, and you do it in a way that you actually feel good about as opposed to feeling slimy about. That's exactly what it is. It's so important because so much of what we know about people originates with them. I mean, we have very limited opportunities to observe people. I mean, even like in my family, with my closest colleagues, I don't see what they do all day, every day. There's lots of things I would never know about unless they told me. And so we are a source of information. We are the most informed source of information about ourselves. So you can't shut that channel down and expect people to have an accurate view of your capabilities. We have to use it. Now, sometimes this is true in psychology across the board. Human beings are not idiots. They try to be really, really smart. But sometimes there's logical things we believe that seem like they make a lot of sense on the surface and they don't prove to be true. So, at one example in terms of mistakes people make, one thing we might do is we have something positive to say. We have a win, an honor, something happens at work, but we don't know how to put it out there in the world without looking boastful. So what we do is we say nothing. We're silent. Okay. And that feels like a good strategy because I don't want to risk that if I say something boastful, I'll hurt myself on that likable dimension. You won't see me as humble and modest and warm. So I keep to myself. That's a good theory. The problem is it's not supported by the science. So when we look at, well, how do people feel when a person who has good news to share keeps it to themselves? Does that person get more credit for being modest? And it turns out, no, they don't. So if we're talking and there's something I could tell you that's positive and I don't, and later you find out about it, which is very likely because, again, grapevines are efficient. So eventually, whatever it is, come to you. Your first thought is not, oh my gosh, Allison is so modest for not telling me. People's first thought is, why didn't she tell me? Either, and then they conclude two things, both of which are bad for you. Either we're not really that close, and she didn't think that was important to share with me, or she thinks I'm so petty or pathetic that I can't be happy for her. And neither of those is favorable to the person holding back. So when we hold back our positive news, people feel less close to us. And it actually ends up not building the relationships. It ends up putting a wedge in them. So those are the kinds of, I talk about a variety of things. Self-deprecating is a very common one where we cut ourselves down, and often we do it to be humble, to be funny. All those are characteristics of warmth, but we do so at the expense of our perceived competence because we see time and again in psychology, people are considered the experts about themselves. So what's crazy is we often believe what someone says and we take it at face value, which is why self-promotion works as well as it does, but it also why self-deprecation is as damaging as it is. Because when you say I'm not good at this, people are like, okay, why would you lie to me? Of course you must not be good at that. So those are some of the things that we might do. And one of the things I try to do with people is help them bring conscious awareness to the story that they're telling. So I always say I'm sitting here in the afternoon sipping on iced coffee. If I said to you, how many cups of coffee did you have yesterday? Most people are going to be able to tell me within a cup, like an answer. But if I said to you, like, how many times yesterday did you hold back a success when you could have shared it? Or how many times yesterday did you self-deprecate? Most people will have absolutely no idea. And what's problematic about that is I always say your story that you want to tell is yours. It's not for me to tell you how you should talk about your story, but you should at least know what you're saying. And so much of our storytelling is on autopilot, and we don't even know we're doing something, good or bad. And therefore, can't choose it. We can't choose to repeat it, can't choose to avoid it. We just don't know. And so, step one, I always say, is to audit your story so that you can start to notice what story you're telling. And then you're empowered to decide, do I like that? Or am I not telling a story that's representing the full, my full capabilities?
Yeah, I love the storytelling audit you suggest in Likeable Badass because what I appreciate about you is that you embrace the idea that you can get better at these things and that if you practice self-awareness and you say that managing status is as much a learned skill as playing golf, the more we practice, the better we become. So I've, experimented with that and it is really eye-opening in terms of, oh my gosh, I did this, 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 this. But once you become aware of it, you're more likely to catch and notice it the next time you're like self-deprecating or the next time you are being so humble you don't tell people what you did that was remarkable. And I love the point that you make that people don't think you're humble when you do that. They just think, why wouldn't she tell me that? And that's even worse than not you're trying to be humble or likable, but it really kind of backfires.
Exactly.
So what would you say are some strategies to telling a stronger story?
So, important thing to understand about talking about a story is that it doesn't have to come out all at once in a big lifetime monologue. I think people think self-promoting is so icky because they think I'm going to have to just be telling people who are minding their own business all these great things about me. And I would say, no, don't do that. People who are minding your own business aren't interested. But you have to look for opportunities, like waiting for doors to open and then going through them. So one example that I offer a lot and I use a lot is what psychologists will call dual promotion. Or in the book, I call it brag and thank, which is say your good thing. Here's this great thing that happened, but then offer gratitude to somebody else who played a role. That research shows that when we self promote that way, we not only get the bump in competence because we talk about the good thing, we also get the bump in warmth because we're shining a spotlight on someone else. So, like a lot of people in a work context, you have opportunities to update your boss, update your team, update the organization on something that's going on, which they may have no visibility into. They know you're generally working on X project, but what happened this week? I don't know. But an update email is a very normal thing to be able to say, hey, here's what's going on. And you could use brag and thank, right? We've had a whole bunch of wins this week, right? And it could be qualitative things. Look at this amazing note of thanks we got from a client. It could be quantitative things, right? In terms of number of deals closed or whatever it is. But then, in addition to the brag, there's also the thank, right? Thanks go to people in other departments who pitched in and were responsive, people on your own team who are junior, who don't, often get the accolades, that kind of thing. And I think two things. One is people find that a lot more comfortable to do because there's that gratitude piece in there and the other oriented and it's warm. And it's also really effective to do that. But you can do that in conversations too. One of my favorite stories is a journalist interviewed me for an article, and she herself is an author and had started to do more speaking. And she was asking me, who's been speaking for a long time, for some advice. And she said, I recently got a standing ovation, my first ever standing ovation, in when I gave a talk. And I feel like this is a good mark of my success as a speaker. And I want to make that known because I think it would speak to my credibility as a speaker. And, but she said, what am I supposed to do with that, Alison? I can't put it on my resume, got a standing ovation. I can't put it in my LinkedIn bio. So now I don't know how to tell that part of my story. And I said, brag and thank is a good way to do it. And it could either be on social media, which I think is a great place to tell stories, and you could say, hey, like, as I'm building my speaking business, like I was so flattered that I got a standing ovation from this amazing organization, like fill in the name. They were just a joy to work with. So you're thanking them. And then you could thank whoever else. You could thank the event organizers. You could thank your speaking coach. You could thank your family for helping you prep, whatever it is. But it's a way to say, here's this thing, and then also shine a spotlight. That's one way. Another one in terms of waiting for your moment is getting like natural conversation started with other people. And I think one of the easiest ways to start a conversation is to wait to one of the many times a day when someone asks you, what's up, what's new, how's it going, how's work? And then when they ask you that, say something more interesting than good, fine, or busy, because those just shut the conversation down and the person just moves along. But if you, with just a few more words than that, could say something truthful, you could get them to stop and actually engage you in conversation. So, a couple examples. One, in the fall, I hosted an event in Chicago. I invited a bunch of people that I considered work professional friends. A guy comes who I like a lot, but I have not really don't know him that well. And in fact, I didn't even know what he did. And not that I hadn't been told, but I had just forgotten. And he comes in to the event, and I just casually say, oh, hey, how was your day? Thanks for coming. And I'm not sure I actually cared how his day was. It's just like the thing you say, right? But then he responds with a big smile. And he said, Alison, I had the best day today. And he legitimately made me curious. So now all I wanted to know was why his day was so good. So I asked him with my own volition, in true curiosity, what was your day grade? And he basically tells me a story about how he lands a new client. I learned that he's in wealth management. He basically says, I got a story of I got a new client that I was meeting for the first time, and that he was really impressed with what this client wanted to do with his wealth in terms of being able to make the world a better place, and how my friend was so excited that by being this guy's partner behind the scenes, he was going to be able to like leverage the impact that this guy was going to make on the world. It was a great story. It took only a couple minutes, but in that, I learned a lot, all very favorable to my friend about how capable he was and how caring he was about the impact he made on the world. And none of that would have happened if he had said, fine, good, or busy. But all he did was he made me curious enough that I wanted to know. And once people are asking you questions, it's a natural opportunity to promote yourself because they're asking you, as opposed to you forcing them to take information that they didn't want. I think that's the idea of reclaiming these moments of conversation to turn them into, dialogue rather than shutting them down. And I think it's very easy to do. And I do this all the time. I just think, say something interesting enough that makes the person like have to know more. I just got back from a month of travel in March where I was gone constantly. And when people would say, when I would meet with them in April, how are you? I would say, I am great. I am back home. I love sleeping in my own bed. I only slept in my bed 2 nights in March. And guess what? 100% of the people said, why did you only sleep in your bed 2 nights in March? And I think they really wanted to know. So I told them, hey, I was on the road. It's Women's History Month. I did 2 weeks of events, and then I took vacation with my family. But I was able to tell part of my story that they would have never asked about just by having an interesting answer to what is essentially a throwaway question.
Those are such fantastic examples of that because they're easy to do. You get those throwaway questions throughout each day. And since I've heard you speak before, I've started being more mindful of those opportunities, of those storytelling opportunities, of those opportunities to practice. One of the things too, I think I emailed you at one point in March and I loved your out of the office reply, which was so intriguing. Can you tell us about that? Because it just made me happy to read it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so cool. And it was so easy to do. I've been better than like, I will be limited availability. So yeah, can you share what that was?
Yeah, they will. And this also really speaks to mentoring because this strategy that I'm about to share with you, which I do talk about in the book and you saw me employ, was not something that would have ever occurred to me on my own until I met somebody who I saw do this. And I thought, oh, that's so brilliant. And as we have more mentors and even peer mentors, they teach us things, including how to build our status, how to tell our story. So what happened was I meet a woman, I start to interact with her, and her out of office is always on, which is fair because she does travel for work. But most of us either, don't turn it on at all, which was I was doing, or they just say, I'm out of the office till X date, as you said, like, I'll get back to you. But she had a couple paragraph message, short paragraphs that basically said, I'm out of the office. I'm doing this killer event with this amazing client, speaking on stage. We're rocking it. We're having the best time. This client is amazing. And I'm fully focused on them today. And I'm going to be fully focused on you soon. So it's going to take me a while to get back to you. And here's my number if you want to text me a cute picture of your dog. And the second I saw this out of office come through, a light bulb went off in my head, given what I do for a living. And I thought, look at that. Most of us think of email as the bane of our existence, like a terrible tool that we have to just like navigate and manage. But here was this woman, now a friend, who's turned it into a storytelling tool without ever having to look anyone in the eye, without ever having to say any words. She sends this out of office. Everyone who emails her gets it. And people actually read them because it's like interesting. Normally you get the boring one-liner. So then you learn, what is this person doing? So I turned mine on in March. I don't always have mine on, which I say that because I always say you have to tell your story. That's non-negotiable. But how you tell it, you have choices. So you don't have to always turn an out of office on. You don't have to always, use the brag and thank. You just got to do something. But anyway, I turned mine on and you might remember better than I what I said, but I talked about the fact that I was on the road for Women's History Month and I was doing all of these events and that then I was going to be rewarding myself by taking my kids halfway around the world and not getting no relaxation whatsoever. But I got so many messages about it, and so many people followed up with me when I would interact with them afterward because they learned a little bit about my story, my life. And it was a more natural way and a more efficient way to do it than having to have conversations with all these people and say, oh, by the way, here's what I've been up to. So I like that one because I think even if someone's listening and they're a super fearful self promoter, you can just set it and forget it, right? You set the message and it never comes across as self promoting because the purpose of the message is just to say, I'm delayed getting back to you. So whatever the reason is just the reason. It doesn't feel like a brag. It's just facts. So I think it's again, not something people have to use all the time, but something that you can. And now that I've put that in the book, I get messages, including as recently as yesterday, from women who write me and they say, "Oh my God, I did it." And guess what? So a woman wrote me and said that she did it and then she went to like something like our kid's soccer game or something. And a guy says to her, "Oh, you're a really big deal." And she said, "What do you mean?" And he basically tells her that after she had put on this creative out of office saying what she was up to, he was curious. So he went and Googled her online and saw all of her accomplishments and all that she had done. So he had took it upon himself to educate himself about her because that message made her interesting. So I get messages like that all the time now, which is I love.
Oh, I love it too. And I think what I loved about your out of office was that it was also funny. You're like, yeah, and if you want to ransack my house, put a little laundry in while you're there. But it was just funny because it just kind of showed where you were at in your life. And it was just like email is kind of such a drudgery sometimes. And it was just fun to get that kind of response. So thank you. So we at Mentium are so excited that you cited some of our research in your book. So Mentium found that the top three development goals for mentees are career planning, executive presence, and authentic self-promotion, which we've been talking about today. So in your book, you note that everyone needs mentoring always. Can you talk about your own experience with mentors in your career journey and the importance of mentorship for likable badass women?
Absolutely. So I always say, yeah, I was so fortunate in a lot of ways early in my career that I got really good mentorship from lots of people, family, colleagues, et cetera, that was transformational in my life. And including in thinking about how to manage and navigate my status and how to build relationships and how to what it really meant to have a strong network in ways that changed my life. And someone was asking me in an interview I did recently about did I write the book that I needed to read? And I said, no, in my case, no. I wrote the book that I was fortunate to have been handed at a young age, a
Mm.
book that I found really transformational, and a book that I realized no one else had been given to read. Not no one else, but many people hadn't been given to read. When I saw really smart people not getting near as much credit for their talent and their success as they should. And I credit that to people telling me, both when I was very young and then when I was just starting out my career, to really think with intention about how much you're giving to your relationships and to be giving in ways that aren't hard. And that made a ton of difference for me. I also think that that's not the kind of mentorship that people always get first or that people seek out first. So, the one need that you have there is the career planning need. When people think about mentorship, I think that's where most people's heads go. If I'm going to get someone to counsel me, I want somebody who has my job 5 years ahead and they're going to be able to tell me how to get to where they are, which is very valuable mentorship. But it's not may not be the only thing you need to learn, right? And because everything is a learned skill, right? So managing your status is a learned skill. Authentic self-promotion, a learned skill. So what I say is if you think about something that feels hard for you, maybe one of those things, that's a great area for mentorship by looking around and finding people who are good at doing that. And that person may not be in your field. They might be your next door neighbor. They might be someone at your kid's school. They might be somebody who's in high school or is 75 years old. I mean, they could be at a different generation. So broadening the scope of the skills beyond the career planning, to think about the presence, to think about the authentic self-promotion, to look at people who make it look easy and say, I don't exactly know what they're doing, but they're doing something. Because man, do they have presence? Man, can they talk about themselves in a really a way that makes everyone joyful, not thinking they're boastful. And just and to ask for some of their time. I think it's so important and it continues to be important as we age and as we advance because oftentimes we expect that we're supposed to know everything and we find ourselves as we get older in the role of advice giver, but we are never really in the role of advice taker or learner anymore. And I think one of the big things I try to make in the book is at all stages of life, you should be in both roles, right? You should be getting advice and mentorship, and you should also be giving it. And I think the idea that young people starting out think I have nothing to teach, and older people saying I have nothing to learn, those are both falsehoods that hold us back.
Yeah, I really like that perspective that you can always be doing both. And One of the things I really liked about your book is that you have such good strategies in there. And like you talked about earlier in this interview, is that we can look to our mentor for, saying, okay, I feel like this, like whether you're having an imposter syndrome issue kick up, your mentor can be your sounding board for that. Or even in doing like, the self-awareness exercises of being able to check in. This is what I noticed. This is what I'd like to improve. And so I really like that this is truly a playbook for how to continue to get better and that mentors can meet you where you're at and help you in that process. So we have time for one final question, Allison. Do you have a favorite quote, saying, or motto?
I have several, but one that I like a lot, it had really been helpful for me is to deal with my lifelong bad habit of cutting myself down, of self-deprecation. This is something that I continue to try to grow in and have done for, I've cut myself down for way too many years in way too many ways, in ways that are unproductive. So a few years ago, I tore my knee and I had a surgery where I couldn't walk on my leg for 6 or 8 weeks. So I was sitting in bed as much as I could. And while I was sitting in bed working, I was binge watching episodes of The French Chef with Julia Child from the 70s, like black and white, trussing the chicken. And I never cooked a single thing of all the shows I watched, but her life advice told through the lens of cooking is spectacular. And one of the things she said, which I tell everybody now, so this is my motto, is never apologize for the food you serve. Nobody knows how it was supposed to turn out but you. And it's totally true for being a dinner host, but it's true for just being a professional or a human, which is so much of the negative information about us comes from us, where we think, oh, this could have been better. And I'm going to voluntarily tell you all the ways in which I didn't do all the things I thought I was going to do. And I have such a tendency toward that that's always really helpful. Allison, no one's asking you. No one's criticizing you. Just do the thing. Hand in the work. When someone says it was great, don't respond with, well, thank you for saying that, but I just really came together at the last minute. I've been sick. Oh, no one cares. Just say the thing. No one wants a dinner host complaining about their food. They want a joyous dinner host that's just happy to have you. And I'm like, no one wants a colleague who's complaining about the work product. You just want someone who hands it in and says, I hope this helps, right? And if it's bad, let them talk about it, right? But you don't have to do that. So to me, that's been really, really helpful because self-deprecation has been such a lifelong struggle for me to quit.
I love that quote, and I can hear Julia Child saying that in my head now,
Right?
so I will remember that. Like, oh yes, but I like that you're like, no, that's more than it's more than just cooking. It's life. It's everything you do. And you're right, nobody wants to hear that about food or work or anything.
Totally.
So, Allison, thank you so much for being my guest today. It has truly been a pleasure talking to you. I want to close by a quote you've mentioned briefly before, but I love this quote in your book. And you said, be as assertive and warm as possible to as many people as possible. This is the behavior most within our control that will help us achieve the status and power we deserve. I love that. It resonates because you wrote this book, and I thank you for writing this book because you wanted women everywhere to have the advantage of the science behind all this stuff, to use this as a playbook, so that they can show up in life as a likable badass. So for all those of you who haven't read this book, Likable Badass, I highly recommend it. Look at all these little post-its here, and it is just fantastic. So thank you all for listening to this episode of the Mentium Matters podcast. If you like this episode, please share it with friends and colleagues. We have many great guests lined up and look forward to having you join us next time. Thank you.